The billionaire's hand froze in the middle of signing a paper. Orion Vera had fired 17 workers that month without blinking. 17. He had destroyed companies that had tried to compete with him, ruined big business deals, and built a reputation as a man who never cared about anyone's feelings. People feared him, even in boardrooms where grown men were supposed to be brave. But now, staring at the security camera footage on his laptop, Orion could not breathe. The new maid was cleaning his kitchen counter. Nothing unusual at first, she was just wiping down the surfaces and making everything shine. But then Orion saw the ring on her finger. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't gold. It wasn't fancy at all. It was a simple, rough copper wire twisted around a small piece of blue glass. Orion's heart skipped. He knew that ring. He had made it himself 20 years ago, in a dusty basement at an orphanage, for a girl he had promised to marry. And here she was wearing it now. Orion Vera owned half of the East Coast's most expensive buildings. His apartment overlooked the bright lights of Manhattan. His name made people listen when he spoke. And he had more money than most people could even imagine in 10 lifetimes. But none of that made him happy. He could not sleep. Every night he lay in his enormous bed, surrounded by soft Egyptian cotton sheets, staring at the ceiling until dawn. He had a California king bed that was bigger than most rooms, and the apartment was completely quiet. Still, he could not sleep. The doctor gave him pills to help. The therapist suggested breathing exercises and meditation. Nothing worked. Orion wanted control. He needed control. He liked controlling everything. How hot his coffee was, where his papers sat, even how the light fell across his desk. That was why he had fired his whole household staff 3 weeks ago. One of them had told secrets to a gossip magazine. Orion didn't know which one it was, so he fired all of them. No mistakes, no trust, no risks. His assistant, a nervous young man named Soren, had brought him a stack of applications for a new housekeeper. "I need someone who doesn't exist," Orion had said without looking up from his papers. "Someone who will not talk. Someone who will not ask questions. Someone who will never try to be my friend. I want someone invisible." Soren had found exactly what Orion wanted. Her name was Alara Quinn, 36 years old, with 15 years of experience working for rich families. Not a single complaint was in her file. Not a single employer could remember her face. Perfect. Alara arrived on a Tuesday morning with a small bag and a simple gray dress. Orion did not greet her. Soren showed her to the staff rooms and explained the rules. "No talking unless I speak to you. No entering rooms I am in. No leaving your things in public areas," Soren said. Alara nodded once and began working. For the first week, Orion barely noticed her. She moved through his apartment like a quiet ghost, cleaning places he had forgotten existed, arranging things he hadn't realized were messy. When he entered a room, it looked different, though he could never figure out exactly what had changed. The light seemed softer. The air smelled a little sweet, something he could not name but found comforting. His meals arrived at exactly the same time each day. Simple food that made him feel something he could not describe. On the 8th night, Orion slept for 6 whole hours without waking up. He woke confused, almost scared. He could not remember the last time that had happened. His body felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted off his chest. He told himself it was just a coincidence. But then it happened again. And again. By the 3rd week, Orion was curious about the woman who somehow changed the feel of his apartment without touching anything obvious. He began checking the security cameras, not because he was suspicious, but because he was fascinated. Alara moved with quiet grace. She never rushed. She never wasted a movement. She talked to no one, hummed no songs, and never showed her personality, except for one thing: the ring. The copper ring with the small blue glass stone. She wore it all the time, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, even when her hands were buried in soap. It looked simple, like a child's craft project, but she protected it as if it were the most important thing in the world. Orion first noticed it on a Thursday evening. He was watching the day's footage when he saw the ring in clear detail. His coffee cup slipped from his hands. The copper wire was twisted in a special pattern, 3 loops crossing over each other before wrapping around the blue glass. The glass had a little chip on one corner. Orion knew that pattern. He had made it himself 20 years ago in the basement of St. Catherine's Orphanage in Baltimore. Orion closed his laptop. I opened it again. Closed it again. His hands were shaking. St. Catherine's. He hadn't thought about that place in 20 years. Memories came rushing back unstoppable. The cramped dormitory rooms. The smell of industrial cleaner, and overcooked vegetables. Older boys stealing food from younger ones. Nights when he went to bed hungry and scared. And her, Alara. She had been 14, small and quiet, with eyes that seemed too old for her face. Other children picked on her constantly. Orion protected her. Not because he was brave, but because protecting her made him feel like he mattered. They became inseparable. She would save half of her bread for him when he didn't have enough. He would stand between her and anyone who tried to hurt her. At night, they would sit on the fire escape and talk about escaping the orphanage and having a better life. One winter night, Orion found a piece of copper wire and a shard of blue glass from a broken bottle. He spent hours twisting and shaping it into a ring, cutting his fingers until it almost hurt too much. But finally he had a ring. He gave it to her on Christmas Eve, the only gift either of them had that year. "When I get rich," he said, his voice shaking, "I'll come back for you. I'll marry you. Keep this as proof." She smiled, and he felt like the richest person in the world. 2 weeks later, the Morrisons came. They were rich, connected, and wanted to adopt him. They promised everything Orion had ever dreamed of. But there was one rule: complete separation from his past. No one from St. Catherine's could contact him. He would have a new name, a new life. The boy from St. Catherine's would have to disappear. Orion hesitated for 3 seconds, then agreed. He didn't say goodbye to Alara. He promised himself he would find a way to keep his promise. But the Morrisons were thorough. They moved him to Connecticut, enrolled him in private schools, surrounded him with new friends, and slowly, deliberately, Orion allowed himself to forget Alara. When he turned 21, he changed his last name to Vera. Vera was a name he could call his own. It erased the boy from St. Catherine's completely. He built his empire alone, trusting no one, needing no one. He told himself the past was dead. Now, staring at the security footage of a woman wearing a copper ring with blue glass, Orion realized the past had never left. It had been waiting. He could confront her, walk into the kitchen and ask, "Are you the girl from St. Catherine's?" But that would mean admitting who he really was. That would mean facing the promise he had broken. Orion Vera had destroyed companies, ruined rivals, and watched powerful men crumble. But he could not face one woman. So he made a different choice. He would test her. He would leave clues that only someone from St. Catherine's would recognize. He would watch her reactions and gather proof. Only then would he decide what to do. It wasn't bravery. Orion knew that. It was cowardice dressed as strategy, but it was all he could manage. The first test came 3 days later. Orion placed a small blue glass bottle on the kitchen counter before leaving for work. It was the same shade of blue as the shard he had used to make the ring, cheap glass that factories produced by the millions. But to 2 children who had nothing, it had meant everything. He watched the security footage obsessively that evening. Alara entered the kitchen at 7:15 a.m., wiped the counters, organized the fruit bowl, and then froze. Her hand hovered inches from the bottle. For exactly 4 seconds, she didn't move. Then she picked it up carefully, almost tenderly, and placed it in the cabinet with the other glassware. Her face betrayed nothing, but those 4 seconds told Orion everything. She remembered. The second test was more specific. Orion found a recording of Silent Night performed by a children's choir. The same version St. Catherine's had played every Christmas. He set it as his morning alarm, loud enough to echo through the entire penthouse. He pretended to sleep, watching her through the security cameras. Alara moved through her duties. When the music started, she was dusting the bookshelves in his study. Her hand slowed against the wood. Her eyes drifted toward the window, seeing something far beyond the Manhattan skyline. She froze for nearly a minute. Then she blinked, straightened her shoulders, and continued working as if nothing had happened. Orion felt something twist in his chest. Maybe guilt. Maybe hope. He couldn't tell the difference. The third test was the most dangerous. Orion had kept one photograph from St. Catherine's hidden in a safe deposit box for 20 years. It showed a group of children standing in front of the orphanage, squinting in the winter sun. Orion was in the back row, skinny and serious. Alara stood a few rows ahead, barely visible, her face half-turned toward the camera. He left the photograph on his desk, face up, as if he had forgotten it there. That afternoon, Orion came home earlier than usual. He didn't want anyone to see him, so he went straight to his bedroom and locked the door. He took out his phone and watched the live camera feed of the house. From his room, he could see everything. He could see who moved where, who said what, and what happened in every corner of his home. But today, he was not watching for work or for safety. He was watching because he wanted to see her. Alara came into the study at exactly 4:30 to empty the waste basket. She moved quietly, the way she always did, like she didn't want to be noticed. But today, something caught her eye immediately. There, on the desk, was a photograph. She froze instantly. Her whole body went still, as if a sudden cold had reached her bones. It was the kind of stillness that shouted louder than any scream ever could. She bent down and picked up the photograph with both hands. She held it carefully, like it might crumble to dust if she wasn't gentle enough. Her thumb ran softly over the faces of the children in the picture. She stopped at 2 faces. Orion, watching from his bedroom, didn't have to look at her to know which ones she was pointing at. He knew. He had always known. She stood there for a long time, longer than he expected, and he could feel every second of it like a weight pressing down on his chest. When she finally set the photograph back on the desk, she placed it exactly where she had found it. The edge of the photograph lined up perfectly with the edge of the desk, as if nothing had ever happened. Then she continued her work, emptying the waste basket, and left the room quietly. She did not speak a word about the photograph. She did not ask Orion about it. She acted as though it had never been there, as though it had never meant anything. That restraint, that self-control, broke something inside Orion. She knew who he was. She had probably known from the very first day she started working for him. Yet she had said nothing. She had demanded nothing. She had expected nothing. And she was still protecting him, just as she had done when they were children. She was protecting him from a confrontation he was too scared to face himself. The space between them, the wall of words they would never speak, became unbearable. Every morning after that, Orion found excuses to be in the kitchen at the same time as Alara. He would linger over his coffee, pretending to read the newspaper. But really, he was stealing glances at her while she moved through her chores. She nodded politely to him, but that was all. She maintained the invisible wall between employer and employee with perfect precision. And every day he wanted to knock that wall down. He wanted to grab her shoulders and demand answers. He wanted to fall at her feet and beg for forgiveness. But instead, he asked her to refill his coffee cup and watched her walk away. The charity gala had been planned for months. Orion hated these events. He hated the forced smiles, the polite conversations, and the way rich people pretended to care about causes they couldn't even name. But his publicist insisted that after the scandal about the staff firings, Orion needed to fix his image. The invitation read, "Philanthropist Orion Vera hosts an evening of giving. 300 guests at $5,000 a plate. All proceeds going to help children in need." The irony was not lost on Orion. He had ordered Alara to stay in the staff quarters during the event. The last thing he needed was a distraction, and her presence had become exactly that. But on the night of the gala, the catering manager came up to him, looking worried. "Mr. Vera, we have a problem," the manager said. "We are short on staff. 3 servers called in sick. We need everyone to work tonight." Orion should have refused. He could have hired temporary staff or reduced the service. But instead, he heard himself saying, "Use whoever you have, including my housekeeper." He tried to tell himself it was a practical decision. He tried to tell himself it had nothing to do with wanting to see her in his world, even for one night. But deep down, he knew the truth. Alara appeared an hour into the gala, carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The catering company had provided her with a simple black dress. She moved quietly, walking with her eyes down, her steps measured and careful. No one noticed her. That was her gift and also her curse. She could move through a room full of people and leave no mark. She could go completely unseen. But Orion noticed. He noticed everything about her. He watched her walk across the ballroom like a compass pointing north. He could not look away for more than a few seconds at a time. She was a part of him he had never forgotten, and now seeing her again brought every buried feeling to the surface. That was when Serafina Langley decided to make trouble. Serafina came from old money, the kind of wealth that had been passed down for generations, so that it felt like a birthright rather than a fortune. 6 months ago, she had approached Orion with a business proposal he had rejected. She had been holding a grudge ever since. She spotted Alara passing nearby and called out sharply, her voice cutting through the sound of the gala. "You there? With the tray? Come here." Alara stopped and turned her face to Serafina, neutral, calm, and collected. Serafina grabbed Alara's hand and held it up for everyone around her to see. "Ladies," she said, her voice sharp, "look at this. The help is wearing jewelry. And what kind of jewelry is this? Copper? Glass?" Laughter rippled through the group surrounding Serafina. She yanked the ring off Alara's finger in one swift motion. "Let me do you a favor," Serafina said, tossing the ring carelessly over her shoulder. "You'll never find a husband wearing garbage like this." The ring hit the marble floor with a small, almost delicate sound that somehow cut through the loud noise of the gala. It bounced twice and rolled under a nearby table. Alara dropped to her knees immediately. Her tray clattered to the floor and champagne glasses shattered around her. She crawled on the cold marble, desperately searching under the table, her composure finally broken. Serafina laughed. Look at her scrambling on the floor like an animal. Orion was already moving. People instinctively parted for him. But this time there was something different in his expression, something dangerous. Something they had never seen in the composed, unshakable billionaire. He walked past Serafina without acknowledging her. He walked past the staring guests, ignoring all their whispers and raised phones capturing the moment. He went straight to where Alara was still searching under the table and knelt beside her on the cold, hard floor. The ring had rolled against the far table leg. Orion picked it up carefully, feeling the familiar weight of copper and glass in his hand. 20 years had passed, but it felt exactly the same as he remembered. Alara was staring at him, her eyes wide and her breath uneven. He was so close that he could see the tears she was holding back. Orion gently took her hand and slid the ring back onto her finger. It was the same finger he had placed it on 20 years ago, in the basement of St. Catherine's. Then he stood up and faced Serafina Langley. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest citizens froze, glasses halfway to their lips, watching the most powerful man in the room defend his housekeeper. "This ring," Orion said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, "is worth more than every diamond in this room combined. And you just insulted the woman wearing it in front of me." Serafina's face went pale. "Orion, I didn't mean." "Get out of my house," Orion said. "And don't expect any future invitations to anything with my name on it." Serafina gathered her clutch and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked loudly against the marble floor. No one followed her. No one moved at all. Orion turned back to Alara and offered his hand to help her up. She took it hesitantly, rising from the floor with as much dignity as she could. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, for her ears only. "I should have stopped her sooner." Alara looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of everything left unsaid for 20 years. Then she pulled her hand away, picked up her tray, and walked toward the kitchen. The gala continued, but Orion barely noticed. He spent the rest of the evening going through the motions, shaking hands and talking politely, but his mind kept replaying that moment over and over. He had knelt for her in front of everyone. The billionaire who never showed weakness, who always seemed invincible, had knelt on the dirty floor for a copper ring worth almost nothing. And he would do it again in a heartbeat. By morning, Alara was gone. Orion found a letter on his desk, placed exactly where the photograph had been. The handwriting was careful, each letter perfectly formed. "Orion, I did not come here for money. I did not come to demand the promise you made 20 years ago. I came to see what kind of man you had become. I wanted to know if the boy who protected me in that orphanage still existed somewhere inside the billionaire everyone fears. Now I know. What you did tonight was more than I ever expected. You defended me when it cost you nothing. That kindness is enough to last me a lifetime. But I cannot stay. Not because you left me behind all those years ago. I made peace with that long before I walked through your door. I cannot stay because if I do, I will become the woman who waits, the woman who hopes, the woman who builds her life around someone else's choices. I spent 20 years learning not to be that woman. I will not unlearn it now. The ring you gave me is the only proof that someone once loved me enough to make a promise. Thank you for kneeling. Thank you for remembering. Please do not look for me. Alara." Orion read the letter 7 times. Then he sat in his empty penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy, and felt the full weight of his own cowardice crushing him. He had known where she was for 5 years. He had even hired private investigators when his empire was secure enough to risk someone digging into his past. They had found her easily, working as a housekeeper in Brooklyn, living alone in a small apartment, still wearing the ring he had made. He could have gone to her at any time. He had the resources, the power, and the freedom. Nothing was stopping him except his own fear. Fear that she would reject him. Fear that she would forgive him. Fear that either outcome would force him to face the person he had become, the one who abandoned the promise he had made. So he had done nothing. He had watched from a distance, monitoring her life through reports and photographs, telling himself that knowing she was okay was enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. And now she is gone again. And this time it was entirely his fault. Orion had built his fortune on the principle that every problem had a solution. Every obstacle could be overcome. Every battle could be won with enough resources and determination. But he could not buy back 20 years of silence. He could not negotiate his cowardice. He could not acquire the courage he had never possessed. He sat there for hours, staring at the letter, thinking of all the times he could have gone to her. All the moments he could have apologized, hugged her, or told her he had never forgotten her. Every opportunity he had missed pressed on him like a stone on his chest. He thought about the photograph she had held in her hands. He thought about the faces of children in the orphanage. He thought about the promises he had made as a boy and had failed to keep. He thought about her, alone in her small apartment, still wearing the ring, still remembering him. And he knew with a deep ache that money could fix anything except the pain of lost time. Alara's letter sat on Orion's desk. He looked at it for a long time. His eyes began to water, and slowly he realized he was crying. It was the first time he had cried since he was 16 years old. Back then, he had been standing in the driveway of the Morrison house. He watched the car drive away, carrying the life he knew with it. Everything he loved seemed to vanish in the rearview mirror. He had felt so empty. Now, many years later, he felt the same emptiness again. He had everything, money, power, and a big apartment in the city, but he also felt like he had nothing at all. 3 days passed. Orion did not go to work. He did not answer the phone when his assistant called. He did not reply to emails from the board of directors at his company. Everything that usually mattered to him felt unimportant now. He stayed in his big apartment, alone, reading Alara's letter over and over again. He wanted to remember every single word. He wanted to memorize the way she wrote. He wanted to see in his mind the space between each line, every curve of the letters, every little dot on the i's. In the letter, Alara had told him not to look for her. Orion had spent 20 years following that instruction, and during that time, it had made him feel like a man he did not like. He had built a life filled with shiny things and success, but none of it had brought him happiness. He had money and power, but he did not have the thing he wanted most, her. On the 4th morning, Orion did something he hadn't done in years. He put on an old jacket he had kept in the closet, but never worn. It smelled faintly like his past, like the life he had left behind. He left his phone on the kitchen counter and got into his car. He drove to Baltimore. He still had the address where Alara lived. It was the same apartment building his investigators had found her in 5 years ago. The building was small and simple. It was in a working-class neighborhood where people did not ask too many questions about their neighbors. It was not fancy. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly and everyone minded their own business. Orion parked his car across the street and sat there. He watched the small entrance to the building. He sat for nearly an hour, thinking about what he was going to do next. He had been in many difficult situations before. He had faced angry boardrooms, fought in hard negotiations, and made decisions that affected thousands of people. Nothing had scared him like this moment. The thought of walking up those stairs to her apartment terrified him more than anything else he had ever faced. Finally, he forced himself out of the car. The building did not have an elevator. He began to climb the stairs. One flight, then another, then another. Each step felt heavier than the one before. His heart beat faster with each floor he climbed. By the time he reached the top, he was breathing hard. He stood in front of her door, his hand raised to knock. But his courage wavered. He almost turned around. Then he remembered the copper ring. He remembered the photograph he had kept all these years. He remembered the 4 seconds she had frozen when she saw the blue glass bottle. She had carried his memory for 20 years. The least he could do was face her. He knocked. The door opened slowly. Alara was standing there. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, and the copper ring was still on her finger. She looked at him calmly, as if she had known this moment would happen someday. "You found me," she said softly. Orion swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. "I always knew where you were," he said. Something flickered in her eyes, but she didn't respond. 5 years ago, Orion began speaking without thinking. The words spilled out of his mouth like a river. "I hired someone to find all the children from St. Catherine's," he said. "I told myself I was just curious. I wanted to know what happened to everyone. But really, I was looking for you." Alara leaned against the doorframe. Her arms crossed, and she looked at him with calm eyes. "And when you found me," she said quietly, "I did nothing." Orion felt shame burning in his chest. He had carried this shame for 20 years. "I knew where you lived. I knew where you worked. I knew you still wore the ring. And I did nothing because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Afraid that if you looked at me, you would see what I really am, he said. A coward. A boy who made a promise to a 14-year-old girl and then disappeared without even saying goodbye. Alara was quiet for a long time. The silence in the small apartment was heavy, like it was filled with all the things they had left unsaid over 20 years. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. Why are you here now, Orion? Orion had practiced answers to this question during the entire drive from Manhattan. He had imagined many ways to explain himself. He had prepared excuses, justifications, and carefully thought-out arguments. But standing in front of her, all of those words seemed useless. They disappeared. Because I don't want to be a coward anymore, he said simply. Not for one more day. Alara looked at him closely. She searched his face for something. Whatever she found made her step back slightly and then open the door wider. Come in, she said. Her apartment was small but clean. There were second-hand chairs and a worn couch. Potted plants crowded every available space, reaching toward the sunlight that came through the windows. Orion felt oversized in the small apartment. His expensive jacket felt out of place among the simple furniture and humble decorations. Alara sat in a worn armchair. She gestured for him to sit on the couch across from her. The distance between them felt strange. It was both too close and too far at the same time. You were right to leave, Orion said before she could speak. Everything in your letter was right. I had 20 years to find you, and I chose not to. I had money, power, and freedom. Nothing stopped me except my own fear. Alara's face did not change. She just looked at him quietly. Orion took a deep breath. Now I understand something I should have understood a long time ago, he said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly between his knees. When I was 16, I thought leaving was the brave choice. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was taking an opportunity to build a better future. But I wasn't brave. I was just scared of being poor and forgotten. I traded everything real for everything shiny. And I've been empty ever since. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small cloth bundle and placed it on the coffee table between them. Inside was a coil of copper wire and a pair of small pliers. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, he said. I'm not here to make promises I might not keep. I just want to try again. Not as a billionaire and not as a boss. Just as two people who knew each other before the world told us we couldn't be together. Alara looked down at the copper wire. Then she looked back at him. What are you asking for? A chance to make another ring, he said. Not because the first one wasn't enough, but because I want you to have something made by the man I am now, not just the boy I used to be. For the first time since he arrived, Alara's calm expression broke. Her eyes shined, and she pressed her lips together. Words that had been waiting 20 years tried to escape. Do you know what kept me going all those years? She asked. Her voice shook slightly. It wasn't the promise. I stopped believing in the promise a long time ago. The night you made that ring, you cut your hand on the glass. You were bleeding and didn't have anything to wrap around it. So I tore a strip from my shirt and wrapped it around your fingers. Alara touched the copper ring on her finger. That's when I knew you were different. You were willing to hurt yourself to give me something beautiful. No one had ever done that for me before. I kept the ring because it reminded me that I was worth bleeding for. Even if you forgot, even if you never came back, someone once thought I was worth that much. Orion felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He did not try to wipe them away. I never forgot, he whispered. Not one day. I just convinced myself that forgetting was easier than facing what I had done. Alara got up from the armchair. She crossed the small space and sat down beside him on the couch. He could smell the familiar scent that had filled his penthouse all those weeks she had worked there. I don't need promises, she said quietly. I don't need rings or apologies or explanations. I just need to know that you're here because you want to be, not because you feel guilty. Orion took her hand gently, the one with the copper ring. I'm here because for 20 years I've been building an empire to prove I was worth something. And the whole time, the only thing that ever made me feel worth anything was a girl who tore her shirt to bandage my hand. Alara smiled, the first real smile he had seen since they were teenagers on a fire escape, dreaming of leaving their small, ordinary world. Then stay, she said. We'll figure out the rest together. The seasons changed, and so did they. Alara moved into Orion's penthouse, but she brought her world with her. The potted plants from her apartment now lined the windows. The second-hand books filled his empty shelves. She still cooked their meals herself. She still wore simple clothes and refused to let him buy her anything she didn't need. Orion learned to live at her pace. He gave more work to his team. He left the office before sunset. He spent evenings sitting with her on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. On her finger, Ilara now wore 2 rings. The original copper band with the blue glass stone, worn smooth from 20 years of constant wear. And a new ring, made by Orion himself. The copper wire was twisted clumsily. The craftsmanship was far from perfect. He had cut his hand making it, just like the first time. Ilara had bandaged it with a strip torn from one of his expensive shirts, and they laughed until they cried. One evening, the sun painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of orange and gold. Ilara asked him a question. Do you regret it? The 20 years? Orion considered carefully. I regret every day I stayed away. But I don't wish I could change it. Why not? Because if I had come back when I was 18, 25, or 30, I would still have been the coward who left. I needed all those years to become someone worthy of sitting next to you. Ilara leaned her head against his shoulder. You're still not worthy. Orion smiled. I know, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be. The copper rings caught the last light of the setting sun. For a moment, they glowed like something very precious. And they were. Some promises are made in poverty by children who have nothing but hope. Most promises break under the weight of time and life. But the ones that survive, the ones that come back after 20 years of silence, those are the promises that matter most. Not because they were kept, but because someone remembered.